Okay, so let's read off the rest of the book very briefly. I have made a very brief account of the book. You should definitely go back and read the parts that you find interesting or fascinating. Collective intelligence. In its July 2007 edition, National Geographic magazine published a cover story on the intelligence of swarms. On observing the activities of ant colonies, beehives, and schools of fish, the biologists involved concluded that there is a type of intelligence that is the product of the collective activity of large groups. This is used in many ways for humans as well, the collective brain as it's sometimes called, where we work in big groups, like IPCC is one of them, even though you would question whether IPCC is now really on track to give us information to do things like adaptation or not. But nonetheless, pretty much everything is produced by teams, and this is what some people would call the second Copernican revolution and so on. Conditions for this happening include the following: a diverse multitude. In this way, each individual contributes different pieces of information to this collective intelligence. It must be decentralized, so nobody must be in charge. There must be some means of gathering opinions in order to be able to arrive at a collective verdict. Often it's referred to as co-production, where sometimes the producers themselves are interacting with the potential users to tune the product from the beginning to make it easier for the user to take it up, instead of just producing something, putting it on the market and hoping users will like it and buy it, right? There must be sometimes means of gathering opinions in order to be able to arrive at a collective verdict in that sense. Individuals must be independent in order for them to properly evaluate information. Well, that's the kind of wisdom of the crowds in a very general sense. We the media, according to the author, emerge from somebody talking to you through the tube, versus we talking back. Argentine blogger Julian Gallo, it may be Julian Gallo, once compared, the challenges currently facing the communications media with one stated by former Coca-Cola director Roberto Goizueta when he asked, "What's our market share of the customer's stomach?" Not Coca-Cola's share of the US market or the world's soft drink market, but of all the fluids everyone in the world drinks on a given day. So it's about getting a sense of where the rubber meets the road, or exactly where the product is taken up and at what scale, right? So obviously, seen from this standpoint, PepsiCo wasn't the only competition. The competition was tea, juice, beer, even water. Continuing along this same line of logic, the traditional media would consider their competition to be rival newspapers, radios, or TV channels without taking into account what Gallo calls the audience's stomach. In other words, what percentage of the time people have available in which to be entertained and informed do they devote to the traditional media, and how much to the new constellation of languages, topics, information, communities, and creative formats found on the internet. So TikTok came along, for example, and suddenly became the rage. There are YouTube Shorts. Facebook has created its own format as well. So when something becomes very popular, other media outlets will try to provide similar platforms as well, and so on. Phenomena like the drop in newspaper sales and the arrival of DVR technologies that allow people to watch TV without having to sit through the commercial breaks are just one part of the story, and this goes into whole Netflix, Apple TV, Amazon TV, and so on and so forth. So that brings us to the consumer power in terms of the value revolution that has happened along the way. In his book Blessed Unrest, writer and environmental advocate Paul Hawken explains how what he calls the largest movement in history came into being. This is how the author refers to the emergence of organizations that defend the rights of living beings, human, animal, and vegetable, and that subsequently the environment. And he attributes very particular traits to that movement, which he derives from comparing social and biological behaviors. Hawken theorizes that this movement is similar to a collection of small pieces loosely joined that forms, gathers and dissipates quickly. It's joined by ideas, not by ideologies, and it commits citizens to seeking solutions for certain needs. It expresses the collective need to democratize public policies by changing the direction of decision making, which up to the present day is imposed from the top down. This sounds nice, but if you look at the last few years and the way leaders have been selected across the world, not only US, but let's not mention other names, but obviously Russia, China and other democratic countries also electing leaders oriented in certain ways in getting things done. So is it really working in this bottom-up control? It's not so clear, but there's an Enterprise 2.0 that the author envisions. In the North American spring of 2006, Harvard Business School professor Andrew McAfee published an article called Enterprise 2.0, The Dawn of Emergent Collaboration in the Sloan Management Review. In it, he defined the Enterprise 2.0 paradigm that would soon pass from academic world to public knowledge, being quickly disseminated in the biosphere. According to McAfee's definition, Enterprise 2.0 is the implementation of the attributes and characteristics of Web 2.0 in business that we just looked at. It represents a new way of working within corporations by which new technologies and business practices permit workers to surpass the limits imposed by the communications tools offered by the earlier model. Within this new paradigm, there lies an enormous competitive edge for companies that make use of social software, which facilitates collaboration and simplifies the exchange of information among those working in a given company, and with networks formed by suppliers, clients, and other stakeholders. This is the co-production that I mentioned. The main objective of a 2.0 business is to generate spaces in which people can realize their personal projects on a collective basis, a distributive network that encourages new relations without being bound by centralized decision making, and in which those on the periphery are just as important as those in the middle. Well, that was 2006. In 2023 October, I'm not sure how well this has worked out. Coming closer to the end, when the world began to understand. In 1992, a group of scientific professionals known as the Union of Concerned Scientists published a manifesto calling attention to the state of the planet Earth. More than 1,700 of the finest minds from around the world, including 104 Nobel Prize winners, signed the document. Its text warned, if not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future that we wished for human society and the plant and animal kingdoms, and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. So the warning that by the scientists wasn't heeded, and it wasn't the first time. As mentioned, this is from before. As mentioned in the earlier chapters of the book, already 2 decades before Scientists' Manifesto, the report called The Limits of Growth had warned of the Earth's incapacity to respond to the predicted pace of consumption. In 1987, the Brundtland Report, put out by the United Nations World Commission for Environment and Development, advocated some form of sustainable development. Once again, mankind failed to heed the call. So, looking at the values, all the paradigm values present: human being, irresponsible production and consumption, exchange, corporativism, welfare state, economic growth, exclusion, appearances, secrets, individualism, competition, old technologies, top-down logic, individual knowledge, and local scope. The new paradigm of values: future, life, environmental, economic, and social account. So you can think of this as environmental, social, and governance. Interaction, association, welfare society, sustainable human development, equality, authenticity, transparency, participation, collaboration, Web 2.0, bottom-up logic, collective intelligence, and global scope. So, in the epilogue, the 2.0 era is born. I don't know where it leaves us in terms of sustainability. How do you put together a jigsaw puzzle when you don't know what the final design will look like? By seeking and finding the pieces that form the outer edges first. So you start at the outer edge and start filling inward. In this book we have established an outer framework, laying out some pieces without knowing what the final image will look like, but having an idea that the figure that starts to take shape following 3 years of research is that of inexorable change. These outer borders indicate that the sustainability tipping point has arrived. Okay. Is it true? Well, that's the conclusion of the author. That everything that was considered of vital importance 15 years ago has now additionally become urgent, and thus the jigsaw pieces that are accumulating within the framework and that remain mixed up and seemingly disconnected all have nonetheless a common denominator: their urgency. There is no longer any time or resources available to humanity to allow it to keep on indulging in irresponsible conduct with regard to the planet and indeed to its own species. So more words like this. Here the first of these waves, so this vision is in progress, and all indicators are that within the next half decade the world is going to be a radically different place, which it is not, because by the time the book was released, and here we are more than a decade later, no such thing has happened. The world is going to be a radically different place. The trends we have described in this book are troubled waters that will generate the waves of substantial change to come. The first of these waves is the worldwide associative revolution, the largest movement in history, the rise of millions of organized citizens who, based on new development technologies and new communication media, work and cooperate among themselves to find solutions to the most urgent problems facing them. Not really. Vaccines happened in response to COVID, but that was definitely motivated by profits rather than anything else. The second wave is the one that companies like Natura, Patagonia, Walmart and Home Depot are riding. Companies that have sealed a new kind of social pact with their customers, founded on the values of sustainable development. I'm not sure people buy this anymore, and this is a commitment that must not be underestimated, since once expressed, it places the company, its products, its strategy and its profitability under the critical eyes of investors and competitors. And I will leave it there. As I said, this is a vision that was put out more than a decade ago, and it's a good one in terms of imagining some bottom-up global collective brain that's going to find solutions by working cooperatively, and maybe this will still happen, but the whole idea of cost-benefit analysis of where the money goes, how the corporations drive profits, and whether they will continue to really get better in sustainability and decarbonization and so on. It's not emerging because despite all the negotiations and regulations, compliance requirements on risk for finance and for adaptation and everything, emissions are still going up, and it isn't clear if we are anywhere close to peak emissions. Peak emissions from oil are considered to be near, according to the International Energy Agency, but again, where we are headed in terms of sustainability is not so obvious. But keep this book and its take based on their research in mind as we go to other books on more traditional sustainability principles, to see what are the underlying principles that we can use to drive sustainability in, let's say, sectoral enterprises like water, food, energy, transportation, health, and so on. Okay, so I'll come back and look at other books in the next section.